Rain doesn't fall on this city. It hunts. It comes down in sheets against a diner window fogged gold with light. In the doorway, something stands too still to be harmless. Soaked through, coat torn at the collar, watching, not asking, not moving, just watching. No one wonders why a man with nothing keeps returning to the same booth like he's circling something he hasn't decided to take. Under that ruined coat, no scars, no hunger. A watch worth more than the building itself. 40 floors up, a name is quietly being erased from a company's books by hands. No one suspects yet. A woman who trusted the wrong smile for 11 years doesn't know it's coming. A girl behind the counter keeps pouring coffee like tonight is ordinary. It isn't. The bell over the door is about to ring one last time, and nothing that walks out will be the same. The man in the torn coat. The rain came down like it had somewhere better to be. It hit the windows of Rosie's diner in sheets, in waves, in a rhythm that matched the dull ache behind Junie Doyle's eyes, the kind of ache that comes from sleeping 4 hours in a hard chair beside her mother's bed and clocking in for a double shift anyway. She wiped the counter. Again. Not because it was dirty, because her hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking. 6:40 in the morning. Table 3 wanted their eggs over easy, not over medium, and would like to point that out. Thank you very much. Table 6 was on their third coffee refill before Junie had finished her first lap of the floor. And somewhere across town, her mother was hooked to a machine that hummed the sound of borrowed time. Junie didn't think about that part while she worked. Couldn't. If she did, her hands would stop moving. And if her hands stopped moving, she'd start crying. And if she started crying in the middle of a breakfast rush, Marge would have something to say about that, too. So she poured. She smiled. She said, "You got it, hon," to a man who did not deserve the hon. Which was, Junie had decided, a long time ago, the only way to survive a place like this, you didn't survive Rosie's Diner by expecting it to be kind to you. You survived it by being kind first. Before anyone asked, before anyone deserved it, before you had the energy for it most days. But you did it anyway. There was a woman who came in every morning at 7 and sat at the same table by the window. Table 9, always table 9, like the diner might fall apart if she sat anywhere else and ordered the same thing. Black coffee, wheat toast dry. She never finished the toast. Her name was Opal Winters. She'd been coming to Rosie's longer than Junie had been alive. "You're doing that thing again," Opal said without looking up from her coffee. "What thing? Wiping a clean counter like it owes you money?" Junie almost laughed. Almost. "It's been a morning. It's always a morning with you." Opal finally looked up. 81 years old, and her eyes still did something most people's didn't anymore. They actually looked at you. Not through you. Not past you to the door, to the next table, to whatever came next. At you. "How's your mama?" And there it was. The question Junie braced for every single day, and never got any better at answering. Junie started, stopped, started again. They moved her dialysis to Tuesdays and Thursdays now, instead of just Tuesdays. Opal didn't say she was sorry. She never did. Sorry was for strangers, she'd told Junie once, and the two of them had stopped being strangers 3 years ago, somewhere between a broken coffee pot and a shift Junie worked with 101 fever, because rent didn't care how she felt. "Twice a week costs money," Opal said. Not a question. Everything costs money. Junie refilled a cup that didn't need refilling, just to have something to look at that wasn't Opal's face. Because Opal's face had a way of pulling the truth out of her. I'm handling it. I didn't ask if you were handling it, sweetheart. I asked how much. Junie set the pot down, hard enough that the lid rattled. 1,200, she said, by Friday. Or they push her back on the transplant list, and back of the list means. She stopped herself, because saying it out loud made it real, and real was the one thing she couldn't afford this morning. It means we wait longer. That's all. Opal nodded slow, like she was filing the number away, somewhere behind those pale blue eyes. You'll figure it out, she said. You always do. Yeah. Junie was already moving toward table 3, already reaching for the pot that was starting to feel like the only thing holding her upright. That's the plan. Except plans, Junie was learning, had a way of not caring what you'd figured out. Across the room, Renata Cole was watching. She always seemed to be watching one eye on her own tables, one eye on Junie's, like she kept a private ledger of who was working harder and who was getting away with something. You spend more time talking to that old woman than you do taking orders, Renata said, breezing past with a tray of dirty plates. She tips well. She's a good excuse. Renata didn't stop walking, didn't even look back, just let the words trail behind her like smoke. Must be nice, being everybody's favorite. Junie didn't answer, didn't have the energy, because some fights weren't worth having at 7 in the morning, and Renata's resentment was one of those slow, simmering things that never quite boiled over. It just sat there, waiting for a reason. She'd find one eventually. Junie just didn't know it would be this soon. The bell over the door rang at 7:52. Junie would remember that later. The exact time. The exact sound, not the cheerful little jingle it usually made, but something duller, heavier. Like even the bell knew this customer was different before Junie did. He stood in the doorway a second too long. Rain dripping off a coat that had given up being a coat somewhere around the collar. Shoes soaked through. A face carrying the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper. Junie recognized it. She'd been wearing a version of it herself for 3 years. Marge clocked him from behind the register. Junie watched her boss's whole posture change, shoulders up, jaw tight, the look of a woman doing math about whether a man could pay for what he was about to order. I got him, Junie said, before Marge could say whatever she was about to say. Junie, I got him. She grabbed a menu, walked over. Didn't hesitate, because hesitating was its own kind of cruelty, and Junie knew exactly what it felt like to have people hesitate before deciding you were worth their time. Morning, she said, like he was anybody, like he was table 3 complaining about his eggs. Booth's free by the window if you want it. Warmer over there. He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. I don't. He glanced down at himself, at the state of his coat, his hands the water pooling on Marge's clean floor. I should go. You should sit down, Junie said. You're letting all the cold in. A beat. Just a beat. But Junie saw it, something, crack open behind his eyes, some door that hadn't opened in a long while. Surprised to find it still worked. He sat. She brought him coffee before he asked for it. Poured it slow, the way you do for someone whose hands are shaking too hard to trust with a full cup. Eggs, toast, the kind of plate Junie would have wanted if she were the one sitting in that booth with nowhere else to be, and no money to be there. I can't pay for this, he said quietly, like a confession. Didn't ask you to. Everyone asks eventually. Junie looked at him then. Really looked. Not everyone, she said. Eat before it gets cold. He ate slow, like he'd forgotten how, and his body was relearning it one bite at a time. Junie kept moving, pouring, clearing, restocking napkins she didn't need to restock, but some part of her stayed at that booth the whole time. Watching him without watching him. The way you watch a candle in a windstorm, half expecting it to go out. "Rough day?" she asked the third time she passed. He almost smiled. Almost. "Rough year. Cold, too. Colder than I expected." He looked up at her, and there was something in the way he said it, like the sentence had two meanings, and he'd only meant to say one of them out loud. "You do this a lot. Feed strangers who can't pay." Junie shrugged. "You looked hungry. Wasn't a hard decision." Most people find it a very hard decision. Most people, Junie said, aren't paying attention. She didn't know why she said it. It just came out one of those true things that slips past whatever filter is supposed to catch it. He went quiet after that. Not empty quiet, listening quiet, like he was writing her sentence down somewhere Junie couldn't see. By the time he left, the rain had softened to a drizzle. He paused at the door, didn't look back at her exactly. More like he looked back at the whole diner, like he was trying to memorize it, and then he was gone. Swallowed by the gray, outside like he'd never been there at all. Junie didn't think much of it. Not yet. She had a section to run, and a mother to call on her break, and $1,200 she still didn't have. Until Marge called her over to the register. And the look on Marge's face made Junie's stomach drop before a single word got said. "You comped that man's meal," Marge said. Not a question. Junie's mind raced through excuses. Because Marge had rules about this. Because the diner ran on margins thinner than the coffee. And Marge had said it 100 times. You give one meal away for free, you might as well give the whole kitchen away. "I was going to cover it out of my tips. I swear, Marge, I wasn't trying to..." Junie. "I know it's against policy. He needed it more than the register did, and I couldn't just stand there and..." "Junie." Marge said it a third time louder, and something in her voice finally stopped Junie's spiral cold. "Nobody comped anything." Junie blinked. "What?" "The tabs paid." Marge turned the register screen around. A receipt. Full price tip included, paid in cash, left folded under a napkin at table 9. The same table Junie realized with a slow, sinking certainty Opal Winters had been sitting at all morning. Except Opal had left 20 minutes before the man even walked in, which meant she hadn't paid for his meal in the moment. She'd paid for it before. Set it aside. Left it waiting for him, or for whoever walked through that door, needing it on a morning too wet and too cold for anybody to be turned away. Junie's throat went tight. She does this for years. For the first time all morning, something in Marge's hard, tired face softened. Every rainy day, every person who looks like they haven't eaten, leaves cash under a napkin and tells me never to say a word about it. A small, almost smile. "Guess I'm breaking the rule today." Junie looked toward table 9. Empty now. Just a folded napkin and a coffee cup Opal had barely touched, like always. 3 years. 3 years Junie had worked this floor, and she'd never known. Never suspected the quiet woman with the dry toast and the 2 sharp questions had been holding the whole diner up from underneath one rainy morning at a time. One stranger at a time, never asking for a thank you. And Junie understood standing there, with a stranger's empty plate still balanced on her arm, that she hadn't done anything special that morning. Not really. She'd just followed a current Opal had been carving out for years, long before Junie ever picked up a coffee pot. That afternoon in the gap between the lunch rush and her second shift, Junie drove to Lakeside Mercy and sat in a plastic chair beside her mother's bed, listening to a machine breathe for a kidney that had stopped doing its job 3 years too early. "You look tired," Corinne said. Her voice was thin these days, worn at the edges like fabric washed too many times. But her eyes still did the thing they'd always done, found Junie first, before anything else in the room. "I'm fine. You're lying." "I'm fine, Mom." Junie took her mother's hand. It was cold. It was always cold now, no matter how many blankets the nurses piled on. Just a long morning. Corinne studied her daughter's face the way she used to study report cards, looking for the truth underneath the grade. Something happened. Nothing happened. Junie Doyle. 3 words and 40 years of motherhood packed into every syllable. So Junie told her. About the rain and the stranger and the eggs going cold on the counter until she made him a plate. About Opal and the napkin, and 3 years of secrets folded up under a coffee cup nobody ever suspected. Corinne listened with her eyes closed like the story itself was medicine. When Junie finished, she didn't speak for a long moment, just squeezed her daughter's hand with what little strength she had left. "That's who you are," she said finally. "That's who I raised. It's not going to pay for Tuesday's dialysis, Mom." "No." Corinne's mouth curved tired, but certain. "But it's going to matter to somebody. And someday I don't know when I don't know how that's going to matter back." Junie wanted to believe her. Wanted it so badly, it hurt somewhere behind her ribs. But belief was a luxury she'd stopped being able to afford right around the time the doctors started using the word stage. She kissed her mother's forehead. Promised she'd be back Thursday. Walked out into a parking lot going gray with evening and did not cry because crying in that parking lot had become its own kind of ritual. And Junie was tired of rituals that cost her something every time. That night, lying in bed, she ran the numbers again. $1,200, 6 days. A napkin full of someone else's quiet generosity that had nothing to do with the debt still sitting on her shoulders. She didn't know that night that the man in the torn coat would come back. Didn't know he'd keep coming back. Tuesday, then Thursday, then twice the week, after sitting in the same booth, ordering the same eggs, watching her with the same quiet, careful attention he'd given her on that first rainy morning. Didn't know that underneath that ruined coat was a man worth more money than Junie could count to in a lifetime. She just knew she was tired, and broke, and scared in the specific bone-deep way that comes from loving someone the world keeps trying to take from you. So she went back to work the next morning, poured the coffee, smiled at strangers who hadn't earned it yet, and waited without knowing she was waiting for the rain to bring him back. He came back on Tuesday. Junie almost missed it. Head down, refilling ketchups running on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar she'd eaten standing up in the walk-in cooler. But she felt it. For she saw it. That same shift in the air. The bell over the door ringing just a little duller than it should. He'd traded the ruined coat for a plain gray jacket, still worn at the elbows, still not quite warm enough for Chicago in November. But his shoes were dry this time, and his eyes found her before he'd even crossed the threshold, like he'd been rehearsing the moment in his head the whole walk over. "Booth's free," Junie said before he could ask, before he could hover in the doorway again, like a man unsure he was allowed to take up space. "You remembered. I remember everybody. It's the job," which wasn't entirely true, because Junie didn't remember the man from Table 12 who left without tipping on Sunday, or the woman from Booth 4 who complained about her hash browns every single visit. But she remembered him. The way you remember a bruise, not because it hurts exactly, but because you keep pressing on it to check. He sat. Same booth. Same window. She brought him coffee before he asked, same as before, and this time he wrapped both hands around the mug like it was the only warm thing he'd touched all week. "You have a name," she said. Not quite a question. "I do." "You gonna use it?" He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that Junie almost regretted asking. Almost took it back because pushing people for things they weren't ready to give, that wasn't kindness, that was just a different kind of hunger. "Not yet," he said finally, "if that's all right. It's a diner, not an interrogation." She topped off his coffee, even though it didn't need topping off. "Eat your eggs, not yet." Something in him eased just slightly. Not quite a laugh, but close enough that Junie counted it as a win. He came back Thursday. And again the following Monday, then Tuesday, then twice more before the week was out. A rhythm. Junie stopped questioning and started, without meaning, to looking forward to. He always sat at the same booth, always ordered the same thing, always watched her work the floor with an attention that should have felt strange coming from a stranger, and somehow never did. "You're in school," he said one afternoon. Not a question either. He'd taken to doing that, dropping statements into conversation, like stones into still water, watching the ripples to see what surfaced. Was. Junie wiped down the table next to his, not looking up. Community college, business classes mostly. Was. Life happened. She said it light, breezy, the way you say things you've practiced saying so many times they've lost their shape. "Mom got sick. Tuition doesn't care about that." "What would you study if tuition didn't exist?" Junie stopped wiping, because nobody asked her that. Not anymore. Not since sophomore year, when the question stopped being interesting and started being cruel. A door that had already closed, that people kept knocking on anyway. "Finance," she said. Quiet. Almost embarrassed by how fast the answer came, like it had been sitting right behind her teeth the whole time, waiting for someone to ask. "I want to run something someday. A business. Doesn't matter what restaurant, bakery, doesn't matter. I just want to be the one making the decisions instead of—" She stopped herself. Instead of always being the one who has to say yes. Junie shook her head, laughed a little, the kind of laugh that's really just air escaping, so something worse doesn't come out instead. "Forget it. It's a diner conversation. Nobody wants their eggs served with a life plan." "I do," he said. And he meant it. She could tell because he'd stopped eating entirely, coffee cooling in front of him, giving her his full and undivided attention, like she was the only interesting thing in a city of 9 million people. Nobody had looked at her like that in a long time. It scared her a little. How much she liked it. Marge noticed the pattern before Junie admitted it to herself. "That's 4 times this week," Marge said, tallying receipts behind the register, not looking up. "Same man, same booth. He's a good tipper." A lie, technically. He never tipped, not with cash, anyway. But Junie wasn't about to explain the truth, which was that some mornings he left 20s folded so small and so quiet under his plate that Junie almost missed them, and every time she tried to find him to give it back, he'd already slipped out the door. "You're spending a lot of time at his table." "I'm spending exactly as much time as I spend at every table." Marge finally looked up. There was something in her expression. Not quite suspicion. Not quite worry. Something in between the specific expression of a woman who had run a diner for 11 years and had learned to read the weather of her staff the way sailors read the sky. "Just be careful, Junie. Careful of what he orders eggs. He doesn't bite." "Careful," Marge said again, and this time there was an edge under it, of people who show up broke and start looking less broke every week. Junie's stomach did something complicated. Because she'd noticed, too. The shoes drying out. The jacket still worn, but clean, now cleaner than a man sleeping rough should be able to keep it. The way his hands, when they wrapped around the coffee mug, didn't have the calluses she'd expect, didn't have the wear she'd noticed. And she'd decided, somewhere without quite deciding, not to ask. Because asking felt like accusing. And accusing felt like exactly the kind of thing that had been done to her. The assumption. The suspicion. The quiet people ran on your worth before they'd even learned your name. She wasn't going to do that to him. Not after everything. Even if some small, careful part of her was starting to wonder what she wasn't being told. The car was black and long and idling, 2 blocks from the diner, in a spot no delivery truck or taxi would dare to sit for more than 90 seconds. He walked to it the way a man walks when he thinks no one is watching. Shoulders dropping an inch spine, losing the careful folded-in posture he wore. Inside the diner like a second coat. A driver stepped out, held the door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitmore." He didn't answer right away. Just stood there a second, looking back over his shoulder at the diner's fogged-up windows, at the small gold letters spelling out Rosie's across the glass at a shape moving behind the counter. That might have been Junie, might have been anyone. "Long one today," was all he said. He slid into the back seat. Peeled off the gray jacket, worn deliberate, a costume he'd learned to wear the way other men learn to wear a suit. Underneath it, a shirt that had never seen a thrift store in its life. Cufflinks. A watch that cost more than Rosie's diner made in a slow month. "You've been going a lot," the driver said, easing the car into traffic. Not quite a question. 15 years working for this family had taught him when a question was welcome and when it wasn't. "She doesn't ask for anything," Whitmore said. Quiet, almost to himself. "Do you understand that she's never once asked me for a single thing?" "Most people do, eventually." "That's what I keep waiting for." He looked out the window, watching the diner shrink into the gray distance behind them. One small, warm rectangle of light in a city that didn't have many left. "I keep waiting for the moment she asks, and she never does." The driver said nothing. Some silences didn't need filling. "I want to know more," Whitmore said finally, "before I decide anything." "Decide what, sir?" He didn't answer that either. Just watched the city blur past, thinking about a girl with tired eyes and a stubborn kindness that hadn't once, not once, checked to see if he was worth the trouble. Opal Winters had outlived 2 husbands, 1 heart attack, and by her own count, approximately 4,000 mornings, at table 9. She was not, as a rule, a woman easily surprised. Which was why the flicker of recognition on her face the first time the man in the gray jacket walked past her table mattered more than Junie understood at the time. "You know him," Junie said. Later, after close, the 2 of them alone with the smell of bleach and cold coffee chairs stacked upside down on tables like a room full of dead spiders. "I know men like him." Opal's hand, spotted with age, wrapped tight around a mug of tea she'd made herself, refusing, as always, to let Junie wait on her after hours. "That's different." "What's that supposed to mean?" Opal was quiet for a moment. Long enough that Junie thought the conversation was over. Opal did that sometimes let silences stretch until you gave up waiting for the end of the sentence. But then she spoke again, softer. "There's a way rich men carry themselves when they think nobody's looking," she said. "And there's a way poor men carry themselves when they've stopped hoping anybody will. That man in the booth." She tilted her head toward the window, toward the wet street outside, doesn't carry himself like either one. Junie's chest went tight. You think he's lying about something? I think Opal said carefully that some people test the world before they let the world in. And I think you should keep being exactly who you are and let him do whatever it is he's doing. Because the moment you start being kind on purpose, the moment you start being kind because you suspect something's in it for you, that's the moment it stops meaning anything. That's not an answer. No, Opal agreed. It isn't. She sipped her tea. And Junie understood in the particular way you understand things from people who've lived 4 times as long as you have, that this was as much as she was going to get. That Opal had seen something, maybe knew something, and had decided deliberately not to hand it over. Not because she didn't trust Junie, because she trusted her too much to let her kindness get complicated by a secret that wasn't hers to carry. The $100 bill showed up on a Thursday, folded into a square, small enough to hide under a saucer, and Junie almost threw it in the trash with the napkins, before she noticed the corner of Benjamin Franklin's face peeking out from under a smear of ketchup. Her hands went cold. "No," she said out loud to an empty booth. "No, no, no." Because $100 wasn't a tip. $100 was rent, was half of Tuesday's dialysis bill, was the kind of money that made her hands shake for reasons that had nothing to do with exhaustion. She looked toward the door. He was already gone. She hadn't even seen him leave, hadn't caught the bell. Hadn't gotten the chance to do what she always did, which was refuse. Gently, firmly. Push the folded bills back across the table and say something like, "You don't have to do that," and mean it every single time, even when some small, desperate part of her wanted just once to keep the money and not feel guilty about it. She found Renata watching her from across the room. "What was that?" Renata asked. Casual. Too casual the way people are casual right before they say something that isn't. Nothing. Didn't look like nothing. Renata's eyes flicked toward the booth, toward the saucer, toward Junie's fist closed tight around $100 she hadn't earned and didn't know how to give back. Looked like a lot of something. He forgot his change. "He's homeless, Junie." Renata's voice dropped sharp and went somewhere close to cruel. "Homeless men don't leave $100 change." "Maybe he's not." Junie stopped herself. Because she didn't actually know what he was. Because the truth, I think he's rich and pretending not to be. And I have no idea why sounded insane out loud. Sounded like something she'd made up to cover for whatever Renata already suspected. So she said nothing instead. Which Junie would learn later was so much worse than saying anything at all. She tried to give it back the next time he came in. Tried 3 times actually folding the bill into his tip jar when he wasn't looking, sliding it under his coffee mug, once even attempting to hand it to him, directly straight out, like ripping off a bandage, every time he refused. "I don't need it," she said. The 4th attempt, quieter this time, almost pleading. "I need you to understand that I don't need it." "I know you don't need it," he said. "That's not why I gave it to you." "Then why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that made Junie feel like he was reading something written on the inside of her skull. "Because you gave me something first," he said finally. "And I don't know how else to say thank you for that. Some people say it with words. I don't have very many good ones." "You're not a very good liar either," Junie said, half joking, half not. "Whatever you're doing, whoever you are, I'm not stupid. I know something doesn't add up." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or the beginning of it. "Not yet," he said. Again. The same 2 words he'd used the first day, and this time they landed heavier like a door being held shut with everything he had. "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She wanted to push, wanted to plant her feet, and demand the truth right there. Coffee pot in hand, rain streaking the windows behind her. But something in his eyes stopped her, some quiet, aching honesty that told her whatever he was hiding wasn't cruelty. It was fear, and Junie knew fear. Recognized it the way you recognize your own reflection in a dark window. So she let it go. Slid the $100 into her apron pocket instead of his, hating herself a little for needing it, hating the world a little more for making her need it. She didn't know yet that keeping it would nearly cost her everything. Friday came in loud. The lunch rush hit early and hit hard. A bus tour, stranded by weather, 22. Hungry strangers, packed into a diner built for 14 orders, shouted faster than the kitchen could fire them. Junie moved through it on autopilot, the particular grace that comes from doing something. So many times your body stops needing your brain's permission. She didn't see Renata slip behind the register, didn't see her pull the drawer count twice, frown at a number that didn't sit right. Didn't see her walk straight to Marge's office with a printed receipt log and a story already half built in her head, because Renata had been building it for 2 weeks now, watching Junie slide bills into her apron pocket, watching a strange man in a gray jacket come and go like a shadow. Nobody questioned, adding it all up into a sum that made a certain kind of ugly sense if you wanted it to. Junie was topping off coffee at table 6 when Marge's voice cut across the diner. Sharp, public, the kind of voice that wasn't meant for a private conversation. "Junie, register, now." The whole diner went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when they smell a scene about to happen. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations dropped to whispers. 22 strangers on a bus tour, and every single one of them turned to watch. "Mimmerter." Junie set the coffee pot down. Her hands were already shaking, and she didn't know why yet, hadn't caught up to the moment, was still 3 steps behind the thing that was about to happen to her. "There's $240 missing from Thursday's count." Marge held up the printed log, and her voice, normally gruff, normally kind. Underneath the gruffness had gone flat. Careful. The voice of a woman who'd been handed a story and hadn't decided yet whether to believe it. "Renata says you've been taking cash. Says she's seen you pocketing bills all week." "That's not—" Junie's voice cracked. Because the number was close. Too close. $100 folded in her apron, plus tips, plus whatever. Renata had rounded up or made up entirely, and suddenly Junie understood exactly how bad this looked from the outside. "I didn't steal anything." Her voice came out too fast, too high. Panic climbing up through her chest, like water filling a sinking room. "I would never. Marge, you know me. You've known me for 2 years. I would never." "Then explain the money in your apron." Renata's voice from somewhere behind her. Cool. Satisfied in a way that made Junie's stomach turn. "Go ahead. Explain it." And Junie opened her mouth. And nothing came out. Because the truth, a stranger gave it to me. I don't know his name. I tried to give it back. 3 times, sounded out loud in front of 22 strangers and a manager whose trust she'd just watched crack down the middle, exactly as insane as she'd known it would. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't explain it right now. Junie." Marge's face had gone gray. Tired. The face of a woman who liked this girl who'd covered shifts for her, who'd once slipped her $40 out of her own pocket during a slow month and told her not to mention it, and who now had to decide in front of a room full of witnesses whether that trust had been a mistake. I have to call this in. You understand that, right? $240 missing, and I can't just... Please. The word cracked out of Junie before she could stop it. Please don't call the police. Please, Marge, I need this job. I need my mom. She's sick. I can't, please. The bell over the door rang. Nobody noticed. Not at first. The whole diner was too busy watching Junie fall apart in real time. Too busy leaning into the particular ugly pleasure of a scene unfolding in public to clock one more customer stepping quietly through the door. But Junie noticed, because it was him. Gray jacket, same tired eyes, standing just inside the doorway, taking in the whole scene. Marge's printed log, Renata's smug satisfaction, Junie's face crumbling in front of 24 strangers in the space of about 3 seconds. Something changed in his expression. Went cold. Went sharp in a way Junie had never once seen on him. There's been a mistake, he said. Quiet. But the kind of quiet that carries the kind of quiet that makes an entire room stop talking to hear it. Marge turned. Sir, this isn't... The $100 in her apron. I gave it to her. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. There was a stillness to him now, an authority Junie had never seen him wear, like he'd finally stopped hiding whatever he usually kept folded away under that thin gray jacket. She tried to give it back to me 4 times. I have witnesses to that if you'd like them. I don't have witnesses to anything else because I imagine there isn't anything else to witness. The room had gone completely silent. And who exactly are you? Renata's voice thinner now, less sure of itself. He looked at her. Just looked no anger in it, nothing performative. Just a long, level, unhurried look that made Renata's certainty visibly shrink by half. Someone who watches people more closely than they realize, he said. And I watched her try to hand that money back to me every single time. If $240 is missing, I'd start counting the till again. Slowly. Because I don't think you'll find what you're looking for in her apron. Marge looked down at her printed log. Looked up at Junie, pale, shaking, one hand braced against the counter, like it was the only thing holding her upright. Looked finally at the stranger standing just inside the door, radiating a calm that somehow made the whole room feel smaller. I need a name, Marge said slowly. For the record. If I'm not calling this in, I need to write down who vouched for her. He was quiet for one long second. It's not important, he said. And before anyone could stop him, before Junie could even open her mouth to ask to thank him, to do anything at all, he was gone. The bell rang once behind him, duller than usual, and by the time Junie made it to the window, all she could see was gray jacket disappearing around the corner, swallowed whole by a city that had 40,000 men who looked exactly like him, and as far as Junie could tell, not one of them was actually him at all. Marge recounted the till, found it short by exactly the amount Renata herself had taken for a register test 2 days earlier and never logged. Nobody said much after that. Renata went pale, then defensive, then quiet in the specific way people go quiet when they've been caught building something out of nothing. Marge apologized twice, stiffly, the apology of a woman who hated being wrong almost as much as she hated the alternative, and told Junie to take the rest of her shift off, paid no questions. Junie didn't go home. She stood outside in the cold, instead coat pulled tight, staring at the corner where a man in a gray jacket had vanished into a city that had absolutely no idea who he was. 3 days. 3 days he'd been coming back sitting in the same booth, memorizing her the way she'd started, without meaning to memorizing him. And in the space of 90 seconds, he'd stood in the middle of a public accusation and defended her, like she mattered, like she was worth defending. No explanations required, no hesitation at all, and then disappeared before she could even say his name. Except she still didn't know his name, which meant somewhere out there, walking through a city of 9 million strangers, was a man who knew exactly who Junie Doyle was. Knew her mother was sick, knew her dreams, knew the exact sound her voice made when it cracked under pressure. And Junie knew almost nothing about him at all. She pulled her coat tighter, watched her breath fog in the cold November air, and felt for the first time since her mother got sick, something that wasn't quite fear, and wasn't quite hope. Something in between, something that made her chest ache in a way she didn't have a word for yet. She just knew, standing on that corner, that this wasn't over. That whoever he was, whatever he was hiding under that thin gray jacket, he wasn't done with Rosie's diner. And some quiet, stubborn part of her wasn't done with him either. The call came on a Tuesday, which was already the wrong day. Tuesday was supposed to be dialysis. Tuesday was supposed to be routine 3 hours in a recliner. A magazine she never read, her mother complaining about the temperature of the room. Tuesday was not supposed to be a nurse named Denise saying the words "we need to talk about her numbers" in a voice too gentle to mean anything good. Junie stood in the break room at Rosie's, with her apron still on, phone pressed so hard to her ear, it left a mark. "What numbers?" she said. Not a question. A demand dressed up as one. "Her creatinine's climbing faster than we'd like. And her potassium." Denise paused, the particular pause of someone choosing which truth to hand over first. "We want to move her to 3 sessions a week, starting immediately." 3. Junie's mind did the math before her mouth could stop it. 1,200 a week had already been a mountain. 3 sessions meant a bigger mountain, meant a mountain with no top. "We can't, I know this is a lot right now. You don't know anything about right now." The words came out sharper than she meant. Sharper than Denise deserved, who was just a woman doing her job, just a voice delivering bad news, because somebody had to. I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "It's all right, honey. Everybody says worse to me on a Tuesday." Junie hung up and stood very still in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. And for a moment she just let herself not move. Because moving meant deciding something. And she had run out completely bone deep, run out of things she knew how to decide. She tried everything that week. Everything a 19-year-old with no collateral and a dying mother could try. The bank said no before she finished the sentence. A payday place on Halstead offered her $400 at an interest rate that made her stomach turn, the kind of number that wasn't really a loan, so much as a slow-motion trap with fluorescent lighting. She sat in her car outside that place for 11 minutes with the engine running and the paperwork in her lap, and she almost signed it. Almost. Until she pictured her mother's face if she ever found out. Until the shame of it. Not shame at needing help, but shame at the specific shape of help. She was about to accept, closed her hand around the pen, and then slowly made her put it down. She drove home instead. Sat in the dark of her apartment with a legal pad covered in numbers that refused to add up no matter how many times she rearranged them. Refused to become anything other than not enough. Not enough. Not enough, which was when she thought about him. The man in the gray jacket. Because he'd defended her in front of the whole diner, without hesitating, without asking a single question, and some small, desperate, humiliated part of her wondered, she told herself just for a second, if he'd help again. If maybe that was allowed. If maybe needing something from someone wasn't the same thing as being weak. She hated the thought the moment she had it. shoved it down somewhere she didn't have to look at it. Because she wasn't going to be someone who needed a stranger's charity to survive. She'd built her whole life around being the one who gave, not the one who took. And if she let that flip now, if she let herself become the person waiting by a diner booth, hoping a man with money and no name would rescue her, she didn't finish the thought. Turned off the light instead. Lay awake until 4 in the morning, listening to a radiator hiss and think through the ache in her chest that wouldn't quiet down. He didn't come Wednesday. Didn't come Thursday either. And by Friday, Junie had convinced herself he was gone for good, scared off maybe by the scene at the register, by Renata's accusation, by the sheer public mess of it all. Some part of her almost understood. Some part of her exhausted past the point of caring thought could. One less thing. She was wrong. He came Friday night. After close. After the chairs were stacked and the floors were mopped, and Marge had already gone home, leaving Junie alone to lock up under a single buzzing light above the register. The bell rang. Junie turned, expecting a mistake, a lost tourist, someone looking for a bathroom. It was him, except it wasn't. Not the him she knew. Gone was the gray jacket gone, the tired shuffle gone, every single thing that had made him look like a man, the world had forgotten. In his place stood someone in a charcoal overcoat that fit like it had been built around him. Shoes that caught the dim light and threw it back, a posture that filled the doorway. The way money fills a room quietly, completely, without ever needing to raise its voice. Junie's hand froze on the mop handle. "We're closed," she said. Automatic, meaningless. Her brain hadn't caught up yet to what her eyes were telling her. "I know." He stepped inside anyway. Let the door swing shut behind him, the bell settling into silence. "I needed to talk to you, and I didn't want an audience this time." Junie's voice came out thin. She set the mop against the counter because her hands needed to be empty for whatever was happening. "What is this? What are you wearing?" "My name is Callum Whitmore," he said. Quiet, steady. Like he'd rehearsed the sentence 100 times, and it still cost him something to say it out loud. "I own Whitmore Holdings. I have for 11 years. The name landed on Junie like a physical thing. Because she knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. It was on buildings, on hospital wings, on the side of a stadium 2 miles from where she was standing. Whitmore Holdings wasn't a company. It was a skyline. "No." She shook her head. Once. Sharp. "No, that's you were homeless. You were soaked through, you didn't have shoes that fit you." "I wasn't homeless." He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. "I dressed like I was. Deliberately. I do it. I've done it for years now. I go looking for people who are kind when they think it costs them something. When they think there's nothing coming back." The words hit slow, then all at once the way a wave hits you from behind. First the confusion, then the understanding, then the cold, sick weight of it, settling in her stomach. "You tested me. Junie, you watched me." Her voice climbed, cracked, and she didn't try to stop it. "You sat in that booth, and you let me feel sorry for you. You let me give you food off my own tip money, because I thought you were—" She stopped, swallowed, started again, quieter, angrier for being quiet. "You let me think you needed me. I did need you." His voice stayed level, but something in his eyes had gone raw. "Just not for food. That's not better. That's worse. That's so much worse." Junie backed up half a step, putting the counter between them, because she needed something solid there, something that wasn't him. Do you have any idea what it's like being watched, being tested and not knowing it, and finding out that every kind thing you did was just data, just some experiment for a rich man with nothing better to do? It was never an experiment. Then what was it? I was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Junie almost turned away, almost picked the mop back up, and told him to leave. But something in his face stopped her. Something old. Something that had been sitting behind his eyes long before he ever walked through Rosie's door. When I was 10 years old, he said, my mother worked at a diner very much like this one. Smaller. Uptown. She worked doubles most days, same as you. His hand found the back of a chair, gripped it like the memory needed something to hold on to. There was a man who came in every Friday. Well-dressed. Important, or thought he was. And one night he complained his soup was cold. And when my mother apologized, really apologized, meant it. He threw $1 at her. Not handed it. Threw it. Across the counter. In front of everyone. In front of me. Junie's anger didn't leave, but something else moved in beside it. She picked it up, Callum said, because she had to. Because I was standing right there, and we needed the dollar, and dignity doesn't pay rent, does it? She picked it up off the floor while a room full of people watched, and she said, "Thank you. Thank you," to a man who'd just humiliated her in front of her own son. He looked up, and Junie saw for the first time exactly how much that memory still cost him 20 years and a fortune later. I promised myself something that night, he said, that if I ever had enough money to matter, I'd spend some of it finding people like her. People who show kindness, even when the world's given them every reason not to. And I'd make sure just once, just for one of them, that the kindness got seen, got answered. Instead of thrown on the floor. The break room light buzzed above them. Somewhere outside, a bus hissed to a stop. That's why I came back, he said. Not to test you, to see you. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one right now. Junie's throat had gone tight tears, sitting right at the edge, refusing to fall, because falling felt like giving something away she wasn't ready to give. I don't know if I believe you, she said. That's fair. I don't know if it matters whether I believe you or not. Because either way, you lied to me. For weeks. And I don't— Her voice cracked clean in half. I don't know how to just be okay with that because you had a sad story too. You don't have to be okay with it. Callum took a step closer, careful to the way you approach something that might bolt. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you to let me help. Separate from all of it. Separate from whether you're angry, whether you trust me, any of it. Help with what? I know about your mother. He said it plainly. No apology in it, which somehow made it land softer, not harder. I know she's on dialysis. I know they moved her to 3 sessions this week. I know exactly what that costs because I've made it my business to know things like that for a very long time. Junie's whole body went cold. How? It doesn't matter how. It matters to me. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. You've been what? Having someone follow me, digging through my life while I was pouring you coffee and feeling sorry for you. Junie. His voice dropped urgent, now the calm finally cracking at the edges. I can write a check tonight that ends every single one of your problems with money. Tonight. Before you go home. And I understand if that feels like an insult right now, coming from the man who lied to your face for 3 weeks. But your mother doesn't have time for you to stay angry at me. And I don't think you're the kind of person who'd let pride cost her her mother's life. The words landed like a slap. Junie opened her mouth to argue, to tell him exactly where he could put his check, his guilt, his 20-year-old memory of a mother who deserved better. And her phone rang. Lakeside Mercy Hospital. The room seemed to tilt. Because it was 9:40 at night, and hospitals didn't call at 9:40 at night with good news, and Junie's whole body understood that before her mind caught up the way animals understand weather, before the sky changes. "Hello," her voice came out small. "Ms. Doyle, this is Dr. Patterson. Your mother's blood pressure dropped significantly during her session tonight. We've stabilized her for now, but I need you to come in. We need to talk about moving up her transplant evaluation. Tonight, if possible." The phone slipped an inch in Junie's grip. Is she okay right now?" "She's stable, but I won't lie to you, Ms. Doyle. We're running out of runway. If we can't secure a path to transplant soon, we're looking at a very different conversation." Junie's knees found the edge of a chair before she quite decided to sit. The mop clattered somewhere behind her. Forgotten. Across the room, Callum went very still, watching her face fall apart in real time, watching whatever fight had been left in her drain out all at once. "I'll be right there," she whispered. Hung up. Sat in the buzzing light of a closed diner with her whole world narrowing down to one single unbearable fact. Running out of runway. Junie. Callum crouched in front of her chair, close now, careful. "What did they say?" She's... Junie's voice broke apart completely. "She needs a transplant evaluation. Tonight. And the wait list, the insurance, the deposit for the evaluation alone is..." She pressed both hands over her face because she couldn't hold the numbers and her mother's name in her head at the same time without something breaking. "I don't have it. I don't have any of it. And I've spent 3 weeks being angry that a stranger fed me $100 I didn't ask for. And now She couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Callum reached into his coat, pulled out a card, not a business card, something else, something with a direct line written in pen on the back, and pressed it into her hand, folding her fingers around it gently like closing a wound. "Call this number the second you get to the hospital," he said. "Ask for Dr. Reyes. Tell her Callum Whitmore sent you. Every cost, the evaluation, the transplant list, whatever comes after is handled. Tonight. No conditions. I can't just... You can." His voice was steady now, the steadiness of a man who had clearly done this before, who had learned exactly how to hold a person up in the moment they were about to fold. "You don't have to forgive me tonight. You don't have to trust me tonight. You just have to let your mother get the care she needs and be angry at me tomorrow once she's safe. That's the only decision that matters right now." Junie looked down at the card in her shaking hand. Looked up at him. This stranger who wasn't a stranger. This man with 2 names and 2 coats and a boyhood wound he'd carried for 20 years, and felt something inside her finally quietly break open. Not surrender. Something closer to grief. Grief for every night she'd told herself she could handle this alone. Grief for the version of herself that believed asking for help was its own kind of failure. "Okay," she whispered. It was the smallest word she'd ever said. It cost her everything. Opal was already at Lakeside Mercy. By the time Junie got there, nobody had called her. Nobody needed to. She simply appeared the way she always seemed to appear, exactly when the world needed steadying. Sitting in the waiting room with her purse in her lap like she'd been expecting this call for weeks. "How did you..." "I have a granddaughter who works the night desk." Opal patted the seat beside her, an order disguised as an invitation. "Sit down before you fall down." Junie sat. Her whole body was shaking now, the adrenaline finally draining out and leaving something worse behind. The hollow, bone-deep exhaustion of a person who has been holding herself together with nothing but stubbornness for 3 straight years. "He told me who he is," Junie said. Quiet. staring at a water-stained ceiling tile like it might have answers. Callum Whitmore, the man from the diner. He owns half the buildings downtown Opal, and he's been lying to me since the day it rained. Opal didn't look surprised, which Junie realized slowly meant something. You knew, I suspected. Opal folded her hands in her lap. There's a difference, and it's an important one, so don't waste your anger on me tonight. You've got bigger things to be angry about. He's paying for everything. The evaluation, the transplant list, all of it. Junie's voice cracked on the last word. And I hate that I said yes. I hate that I needed to say yes. I've spent my whole life being the one who takes care of people. And tonight, I just handed my mother's whole life to a stranger with a checkbook because I didn't have any other choice left. You had a choice, Opal said gently but without softness. You chose your mother over your pride. That's not weakness, Junie. That's the hardest choice there is, and you made it in about 4 seconds flat. Junie didn't answer. Couldn't. The tears came finally quiet and exhausted, sliding down a face too tired to fight them anymore. Opal reached over, took her hand, cold, thin, 81 years of living, folded into that grip, and held it the way you hold something you intend to keep holding for as long as it takes. Your mother is going to be all right tonight, she said. That's the only sentence that matters right now. Everything else, the money, the man, the anger you're allowed to feel tomorrow, all of it can wait until the sun comes up. They sat like that. Time. 2 women 60 years apart in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, while somewhere down the hall, a machine kept a heart beating that Junie had spent 3 years terrified of losing. Somewhere across the city, in an office 40 floors above the traffic, Callum Whitmore stood at a window with a phone in his hand and a name, Doyle Room 412, stabilized, glowing on the screen, and felt for the first time in a very long time, like the promise he'd made a grieving 10-year-old boy might actually mean something. But Junie didn't know that. Not yet. She only knew the weight of her mother's hand in hers an hour later, when the doctors finally let her back, pale-tired tubes and monitors, and the steady beep of a heart that was somehow still fighting. You came, Corinne whispered. Always. Junie pressed her lips to her mother's forehead, holding on like letting go might undo the whole night. I'm not going anywhere. The bill. Don't worry about the bill. Junie's voice broke just slightly on a truth she still hadn't fully accepted herself. Somebody's taking care of it. Corinne's eyes searched her daughter's face, too tired to ask the question properly, but asking it anyway, the way mothers always find a way to ask the things that matter most. Who? Junie thought of a gray jacket, a charcoal coat, a boy standing beside his mother while a dollar bill hit the floor. Someone who owed the world a kindness, she said quietly, and decided to pay it back through us. Outside the window, Chicago kept moving cars, sirens. A city that never once slowed down to notice one small, exhausted family fighting to stay together in room 412. But inside that room for the first time in 3 years, Junie let herself believe just a little that maybe they were going to be okay. She didn't know yet what accepting that help would cost her. Didn't know that somewhere beyond tonight, beyond the relief, beyond the hospital lights, beyond the fragile peace settling over her mother's sleeping face, a door was about to open onto a world Junie had never been meant to walk through. A world with its own rules, its own dangers. And a man named Foster Crane, who had not yet learned her name, but was about to decide she didn't deserve to be in the room at all. The hospital room had smelled like antiseptic and slow miracles for 6 days before they let Corinne go home stable. For now, a name added quietly to a transplant list that had once felt as far away as the moon, and now somehow had a number attached to it. A real number. A real chance. Junie hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in a week, and somehow on the 7th morning, she found herself standing in front of a building made almost entirely of glass. 60 floors of it, catching the sunrise and throwing it back at her like the whole structure was daring her to look away first. She didn't. Whitmore Holdings, the letters sat carved into black stone by the entrance quiet, understated the kind of quiet that only comes from money that has never once needed to raise its voice. Junie smoothed down a blazer that still had the tags cut off that morning, bought 2 days ago, with a check she still hadn't fully forgiven herself for accepting, and walked through revolving doors into a lobby with ceilings tall enough to hold weather. You don't belong here. The thought arrived before she'd taken 3 steps. Uninvited. Familiar in the worst way, the same voice that used to whisper through community college. Hallways through job applications. She never sent through every room that ever made her feel like she was trespassing in her own life. Except you do, she told herself. Because he asked you here. Because you earned a seat even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Which didn't stop her hands from shaking as she gave her name at the front desk. Callum met her personally on the 44th floor, which Junie would learn later he almost never did not. For interns, not for anyone below director level, not in 11 years of running this building. But he was waiting by the elevator when the doors opened, hands in his pockets, looking almost as nervous as she felt. You made it, he said. Barely. Junie's eyes swept the floor behind him. Glass offices hushed phone calls, 100 people moving with the specific urgency of people who got paid a great deal to look busy. This is a lot of building for one man. It felt like a lot of building to me too the first day. A small smile, almost boyish on a face that carried 50 years and a fortune most people couldn't count to. You get used to it, eventually. Did you? No, he admitted. Not really. He walked her through it. The mentorship program, structured loosely around finance and operations, built specifically so she could finish her degree part-time while working under people he trusted. Introduced her to 2 junior analysts who shook her hand with the polite, guarded curiosity of people who'd clearly already heard some version of her story and hadn't decided yet whether to believe it. And then he walked her past a corner office with frosted glass and a nameplate reading, Foster Crane, Executive Vice President. And something in Callum's pace changed. Just slightly. A half step slower. A held breath. That's Foster, Callum said. He's been with me 11 years. Built half of what you're standing in. Should I be worried? Callum considered the question longer than Junie expected. Just be yourself, he said finally. That's all that's ever worked with anyone. It wasn't really an answer. Junie noticed that. Filed it away, the way she'd learned to file away all the small, careful non-answers people gave when the truth was more complicated than they wanted to admit out loud. Foster Crane found her 3 hours later in the small glass-walled office they'd given her, barely bigger than a closet, but hers with her name on a temporary paper placard someone had taped to the door. He didn't knock. Just appeared in the doorway, tall, silver-templed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Junie's mother's entire hospital bill, and looked at her the way you look at a stain on carpet you'd just had cleaned. So you're the waitress, he said. Junie. She stood, extended a hand he didn't take. Junie Doyle, I know your name. He said it flatly, like a fact he resented having to know. I've read your file. 19. No completed degree. No professional experience beyond. He glanced at a folder he wasn't even holding, like the words were memorized or food service. That's right. And Mr. Whitmore has decided that qualifies you for a seat at this company. He's decided I'm worth investing in. Junie kept her voice level, though her heart had started hammering somewhere behind her ribs, because this was exactly the room she'd been afraid of walking into. The one where somebody looked at her and did the math out loud, made her feel every gap in her resume like a wound freshly reopened. I'm not going to apologize for that. Something flickered behind Foster's eyes. Not respect, exactly. Recalculation, maybe. Good, he said, because I'm not going to make this easy for you. I didn't ask for easy. No. A thin smile more warning than friendliness. I don't imagine you did. He left without another word. And Junie stood alone in her too small office, hands pressed flat against the desk to keep them from shaking, and thought this is a different kind of hungry room. But it's still a hungry room, and I already know how to survive those. She just didn't know yet how expensive this particular room's hunger was going to be. The weeks folded into each other, fast in the way exhaustion makes time fold. Junie up before dawn, classes online in the gaps between meetings. Evenings spent visiting her mother's small rented room, 2 blocks from the hospital where Corinne was stubbornly getting stronger. Because Junie had decided something in that first week. Quietly, without telling anyone. She wasn't going to be anyone's charity case, which meant she read every report twice. Stayed later than the junior analysts who'd grown up with names like theirs on doors like Foster's. Asked questions in meetings that made people pause not because they were foolish, but because nobody expected a 19-year-old former waitress to understand cash flow projections better than half the room. Slowly, painfully slowly, something started to shift. An analyst named Priya started saving her a seat in the morning briefings. A junior director complimented a memo she'd written on vendor contracts, said it was cleaner than anything his own team had produced in months. Small things. Fragile things. But they were something proof that maybe she wasn't just Callum Whitmore's charity project after all. Foster noticed too, and Foster did not like what he noticed. It started small, the way these things always start small. A meeting invite that mysteriously never reached her inbox. A project deadline moved up without notification, so she scrambled to deliver something in half the promised time, while everyone else on the team had known for a week. A comment in a hallway, not to her, but loud enough to be heard about how some people get shortcuts the rest of us had to earn. Junie told herself it was nothing. Told herself over and over in the specific tired voice of a person determined not to make trouble in a room she'd only just been let into. Because if you complain, you're the problem, which means you swallow it, which means you work twice as hard to prove them wrong instead of proving yourself right by making noise. Until the day Opal came to visit. It hadn't been planned. Opal had simply shown up unannounced the way she did everything, dressed in the same worn wool coat she'd worn to the diner for 15 years, carrying a small paper bag of homemade cookies. Because you're not eating enough, I can tell, just by looking at your wrists. Junie met her in the lobby, laughing for the first time in weeks, hugging a woman who smelled like lavender and old paper, and every good thing about the life Junie had almost forgotten she still had. They were halfway to the elevator when Foster Crane crossed their path. He looked at Opal for exactly 1.5 seconds, took in the coat, the worn shoes, the paper bag with a grease stain already blooming through the bottom. And he didn't say hello, didn't nod, didn't do the polite, meaningless thing every other executive in that lobby did when passing a guest, a small acknowledgement costing nothing at all. He just looked through her. The way you look through furniture. The way you look through something that has already been categorized, filed, dismissed before it's finished walking past you. Junie. Foster's eyes found her instead cool and precise. The hostings deck needs revisions by 5. Don't let Tor pause deliberately unfinished, deliberately cruel. Distractions slow you down today. He walked on. Didn't look back. Left behind him a silence so heavy, Junie could feel Opal's whole body go rigid beside her. Well, Opal said, finally, into that silence. Her voice was light. Too light. The particular lightness of a woman refusing on principle to let a stranger see her flinch. He's charming. Opal, I'm so sorry he's not usually. Don't you dare apologize for him. Opal's chin lifted 81 years of dignity settling into her spine like armor. I've been looked past by better men than that one sweetheart. It doesn't cost me a thing. But Junie saw it. The small tremor in Opal's hand as she adjusted her coat. The extra beat it took her to smile again. And something inside Junie went very still. Because she'd spent 3 years learning to read the exact temperature of people's cruelty, learning which insults were thoughtless, and which ones were deliberate learning to tell the difference between someone having a bad day and someone who simply believed all the way down that some people mattered less. Foster Crane hadn't been having a bad day. Foster Crane looked at people and decided instantly, permanently what they were worth. And Junie understood walking Opal back to the elevator with her jaw tight and her hands curled into careful fists that she'd just seen exactly how Foster Crane saw her too. Underneath the polite hostility in the office. Underneath the memos and the moved deadlines. He didn't see an employee he disagreed with. He saw a waitress who didn't belong. The same way he saw Opal. Which meant somewhere in the back of Junie's mind, a door quietly cracked open. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something that started paying very, very close attention. She started noticing things after that. Small things, at first. The way Foster's numbers on the Hastings account never quite matched the raw data Priya sent over. The way certain expense reports routed through his office instead of the standard approval chain, always just under the threshold that would trigger a second signature. The way when Junie asked an innocent question in a Tuesday meeting about a vendor contract that seemed unusually generous. Foster's jaw tightened for exactly 1 second before he smoothly redirected the conversation. She told herself she was imagining it. Told herself more than once that this was exactly the kind of paranoia people warned you about, Shoejob. Hostile boss, a mind looking for patterns, because patterns felt safer than chaos. Except patterns don't lie, a small voice kept insisting. Which means either you're losing your mind, or he's hiding something. And you don't strike me as someone who's losing her mind. She didn't say anything. Not yet. Just watched. Quietly. Carefully. The same way she'd learned to read a diner floor without anyone realizing they were being read. Who needed a refill before they asked who was about to complain, before they opened their mouth. Who was lying about being fine. Foster Crane, Junie, was starting to believe was not fine. He was hiding something. She just didn't have proof yet. The board presentation happened on a Thursday, which Junie would remember later as the day everything she'd built in 6 careful weeks nearly came apart in 90 humiliating seconds. It was supposed to be small. a quarterly update on the mentorship program's early results presented to a room of investors who'd apparently voiced concerns, Callum's word, delivered gently over coffee the week before, about whether the program was a wise use of company resources. "You don't have to do this," he'd told her. "I can present it myself." No. Junie had felt something steady settle into her spine when she said it. "It's my program, my results. I'll present it." She should have known Foster volunteered to help prepare the deck for a reason. The boardroom was glass on 3 sides, 40 floors up, a long table, surrounded by people whose combined net worth Junie couldn't have calculated if she'd had a week. She stood at the front with a clicker in her shaking hand, and a presentation she'd rehearsed 4 times the night before, alone in her apartment out loud to an audience of nobody. The first 6 slides went fine. Then slide 7 loaded, and the number in the corner projected program cost a figure. Junie had checked twice, triple-checked. Against the finance team's numbers was wrong, not slightly wrong. Wrong by a factor that made 3 board members sit up straight wrong, in a way that made the number look less like an investment and more like a hole being quietly dug in the company's budget. That's Junie's voice caught. She stared at the number like it might correct itself if she just looked hard enough. "That's not the figure I submitted." "Are you certain?" Foster's voice from the side of the room, calm, almost gentle. Almost sympathetic, the kind of gentle that had a blade folded up inside it. "Because that's the figure that was in the final file you sent to my office Tuesday." "I never sent you a file Tuesday." The words came out too fast, too defensive, exactly the way panic sounds from the outside. "I sent it to Priya. Priya forwards everything to my office." "Yes." Foster's expression didn't change. Didn't need to. The room was already doing the math for him, already reading the story. He wanted them to read. A young hire in over her head caught fudging numbers in front of the board. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I simply think the board deserves accurate figures before they make a decision this significant. These are accurate. I don't know how that number got changed, but I promise you, Ms. Doyle." A board member, Junie didn't recognize, older silver-haired, unimpressed, cut in with the particular tone of someone who had already made up their mind. "Perhaps we table the rest of this presentation until the figures can be verified." The room was already turning away from her. She could feel it, the particular sickening sensation of an audience, deciding collectively, silently, that you were no longer worth their attention. Papers shuffling. A phone glowing under the table. Someone's chair creaking as they leaned back done. Junie looked toward Callum. I was watching her. Steady. Unreadable in a way she'd never seen from him before, not the warm, careful attention from the diner booth, not the fierce, protective anger from the night at the register. Something more careful than that. Something guarded. Because she understood in that terrible glass-walled moment exactly what it looked like from where he sat. His mentee. His personal project. Standing in front of his board with numbers that didn't add up on the very day everyone had been waiting to see if she'd fail. "I need a minute," Junie said. Her voice barely held together. "I can pull the original file and show you." "We don't have a minute, Ms. Doyle." The silver-haired board member again already gathering papers. "We have a schedule." The meeting ended 11 minutes later. Junie stood at the front of that glass room alone while 40 floors of Chicago blurred behind the window like something underwater, and felt every single thing she'd built in 6 weeks, every late night, every extra hour, every small proof that she belonged, collapse into a single unbearable silence. Nobody said anything cruel to her on the way out. They didn't have to. She found Foster in the hallway afterward, alone for once, checking something on his phone with the unhurried calm of a man who had gotten exactly what he wanted. "You changed that number," Junie said. Quiet, shaking, but quiet. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I checked it 3 times. It was right when I sent it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated that it cracked, hated that he got to watch it happen. "You did something. I don't know how yet, but I will find out." Foster looked at her, then really looked for the first time since she'd started at the company, and something in his expression wasn't anger. It was almost amusement. The specific amusement of a man who had never once in his entire life been afraid of a 19-year-old. "Careful, Ms. Doyle." His voice dropped, soft enough that no one else in the hallway could hear it. "Girls who go looking for things tend to find more than they can carry." He walked away before she could answer, left her standing alone under fluorescent lights 40 floors above. A city that had no idea one of its wealthiest buildings had just quietly declared war on a girl who used to pour coffee for a living. Junie's phone buzzed. A text from Callum, "My office. Now." 3 words, no warmth in them at all. She stood there a long moment, staring at the screen, feeling something old and familiar rise up in her chest, the same voice from the lobby. Back on her first day. "You don't belong here." Except this time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like the beginning of something Junie didn't have a name for yet. Something that 6 weeks ago, pouring coffee in a rain-soaked diner, she never could have imagined feeling toward a man in a glass office 40 floors above the ground. She wasn't going to run. Not from Foster Crane. Not from a boardroom full of strangers who'd already decided who she was before she opened her mouth. And not. She straightened her blazer, wiped her eyes once hard, and started walking toward Callum's office, not from whatever conversation was waiting for her behind that door. Because she had survived worse rooms than this one. She just hadn't until tonight realized how much worse this room was about to get. Callum's office had glass walls, too. Junie noticed that as she walked toward it, the whole floor built out of transparency, out of nothing, to hide behind, which felt like a joke, considering what she'd just learned about the man who ran it. I was standing at the window when she walked in. Not sitting. Standing the way people stand when sitting feels like giving something up. "Close the door," he said. She did, the click of it landing loud in a room this quiet. "I didn't change that number." The words came out before he'd even turned around, before either of them could dress the moment up in anything softer. "I need you to hear that first, before anything else gets said. I heard you the first time." Callum turned. His face was unreadable in a way that scared her more than anger would have. "I'm not accusing you, Junie. You're not defending me either." Silence. The particular kind that tells you more than words would. 11 years, he said finally. Quiet, almost to himself. "Foster's been with me 11 years, built half this company beside me, and you've been here 6 weeks. So the math favors him." "The math," Callum said, "doesn't know either of you. It just knows who's been in the room longer." Junie felt something in her chest go tight and cold at once. Because it wasn't it. This was the moment every version of her life had warned her was coming. The moment loyalty ran out. The moment being right stopped being enough. The moment the room decided who mattered based on nothing but how long they'd been allowed to stand in it. 48 hours, Callum said. "What? Give me proof. Real proof, not a feeling, not an instinct. Something I can put in front of the board, and not have it fall apart in 90 seconds, like it did today." His eyes held hers steady, careful asking for something he didn't have the right to ask for, and knew it. "Find me proof, and I will burn this building down around Foster Crane myself. But I need proof, Junie. I can't hand you the company on faith alone. Not against him. Not yet." It wasn't trust. Not fully. But it wasn't nothing either. 48 hours, Junie said, and then turned toward the door before he could see her hands start shaking. Okay. Priya was still at her desk at 9 that night, which Junie had been counting on, because Priya was the kind of person who stayed late out of guilt even when the guilt wasn't hers to carry. "You sent me the file Tuesday," Junie said, dropping into the chair across from her. No preamble. She didn't have time for preamble. The Hastings numbers, before the board deck went out. "I sent it exactly like you gave it to me." Priya's eyes went wide, understanding, arriving fast. "Wait, you think somebody changed it after that?" "I think somebody changed it after that." They pulled the file history together. The two of them hunched over a single monitor in an empty office, the whole floor gone quiet and dark around them, except for the small blue glow of a screen that was about to tell them something neither of them wanted to know. Because there it was. A modification timestamp. 6:47 p.m. the night before the board meeting. Logged under credentials that didn't belong to Junie. Didn't belong to Priya either. F. Crane, admin. "Oh my God," Priya whispered. "Don't say anything yet." Junie's voice had gone very still, very careful, the stillness of someone trying not to shake apart in front of the one person who might be able to help her. This proves he touched the file. It doesn't prove why. Which meant they kept digging. Which meant 2 more hours of pulling vendor contracts, cross-referencing invoice numbers, against a name that kept surfacing, no matter which direction they searched. A shell company called Meridian Sourcing threaded through 11 years of Whitmore Holdings paperwork like a vein nobody had ever bothered to check. "Junie," Priya's voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Meridian Sourcing's registered address is a UPS store. And the listed director," she turned the screen. "It's Foster's brother-in-law." Junie sat back, felt the whole shape of it click into place, cold and clear and enormous. Foster hadn't sabotaged her presentation because she didn't belong. He'd sabotaged it because she'd gotten close. Because a 19-year-old former waitress asking one too many honest questions about a vendor contract had wandered without even realizing it straight toward the edge of something he'd spent 11 years hiding. She wasn't a distraction to him. She was a threat. He found her the next morning, before she'd even had coffee, standing in the doorway of her 2 small office arms, crossed, wearing the same calm he always wore. Except this time, underneath it, Junie could see something else. Something tighter. Something that hadn't been there before. "You're digging," Foster said. "I'm doing my job. Your job is mentorship data, not vendor contracts." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him without asking, and Junie's heart started hammering against her ribs even as she kept her face perfectly, deliberately still. "I told you once already. Careful. You told me girls who go looking for things find more than they can carry." She met his eyes. Didn't blink. "Turns out I've been carrying a lot heavier than this my whole life. I think I'll manage." Something shifted behind his composure. Not quite fear, but close enough that Junie filed the sight away, like a small, cold victory. "I could make all of this disappear," Foster said, quieter now, leaning in like he was doing her a favor. "The board incident. The doubt hanging over your little mentorship program. All of it gone cleaned up like it never happened. All you'd have to do is resign quietly. Go back to whatever life you had before Callum decided to play savior. And if I don't, then you'll find," he said, that this company has a very long memory for people who cause it trouble. Longer than yours. I promise you that. He left before she could answer. Left her standing in a room barely big enough for a desk and a chair, jaw-tight pulse hammering hard enough to feel in her throat. Because he'd just confirmed everything. Confirmed it without meaning to the panic underneath the threat, the desperation dressed up as generosity. A man with nothing to hide doesn't offer to make things disappear. Junie picked up her phone, called Callum. I have it, she said. All of it. Meet me in an hour. The emergency board session convened at 4 o'clock that afternoon. 11 people around a long glass table. The same room that had watched Junie fall apart 6 days earlier. Now watching her walk in with a folder under her arm and something steady in her spine that hadn't been there the first time. Callum stood at the front. Didn't sit. His face had the particular stillness of a man holding 11 years of friendship in one hand and 11 years of betrayal in the other, weighing which one was actually real. I asked you all here, he said, because 6 days ago this board watched a young woman get discredited in front of every one of you. I want you to see why. He nodded to Junie. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She wasn't sure when that had happened, somewhere between the empty office at midnight and this moment. Some final layer of fear had simply burned away and left something harder underneath. The number that appeared in my presentation, she said, wasn't the number I submitted. I have the file history to prove it. She clicked forward. The modification log filled the screen timestamp glowing credentials, impossible to argue with. It was changed the night before from Mr. Crane's terminal. A ripple went through the room. Foster's face had gone very white, very still. This is absurd, he said. Anyone could have accessed. Nobody else has those credentials, Priya said, standing at the back of the room where she'd insisted on being present, voice shaking, but clear. I checked. Twice. And this, Junie continued, before Foster could recover, sliding the next document across the table, is Meridian Sourcing. A vendor this company has paid $4.1 million to over 11 years, registered to a UPS store, directed by Mr. Crane's brother-in-law. She let that sit in the silence for exactly as long as it needed to. I think the numbers I brought to this board 6 days ago were never the problem, Mr. Crane. I think I was getting close to the actual problem, and you needed everyone in this room to stop trusting me before I found it. The silver-haired board member who'd cut her off the first time leaned forward, now slow-cold. Foster, this is a fabrication. Foster's voice had lost its calm entirely, climbing toward something desperate. Callum, 11 years. We're going to take the word of a waitress over. Don't. Callum's voice cut through the room like something breaking. Quiet. Final. Don't say that word again, like it's a weakness, Foster. It was never a weakness. It was the only reason I ever trusted her at all, because she never once, in 6 weeks, tried to be anything other than exactly who she was. He turned to the board. I'd like a formal investigation opened, effective immediately, and I'd like Mr. Crane escorted from the building while it happens. Security arrived within 4 minutes. Junie watched Foster Crane walk the length of that glass room. Silence passed the board members who had 6 days ago dismissed her without blinking, and now wouldn't meet his eyes at all. And she felt no triumph in it. No satisfaction, even. Just something quieter. Something like relief. The specific relief of a door finally closing on a threat she'd carried alone for 2 exhausting weeks. Callum found her afterward alone in the small glass office that had never quite felt like hers, until this exact moment. "I doubted you," he said. No preamble. For about 6 hours in that boardroom, I let myself doubt you. And I need you to know I'm sorry for that. Truly. You gave me 48 hours instead of firing me on the spot." Junie leaned back in her chair, exhausted, in a way that felt for the first time in weeks like the good kind. The kind that comes after a fight, actually worth fighting. That's more than most people would have given me. It shouldn't have taken proof. His voice was low, rough at the edges. I should have believed you the moment you said it wasn't you. I spent a lifetime looking for people who are honest when it costs them something, Junie. And then the one time it actually cost you something, I hesitated. You're allowed to hesitate. Junie surprised herself by meaning it. Foster fooled you for 11 years. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what a good liar looks like up close for a long time. Callum was quiet a moment, then softer. Your position here isn't a mentorship anymore. Not officially. The board wants to formalize it a real title, a real salary backdated. You earned that today. Not because of anything I gave you. Because of what you found. Junie felt something in her throat go tight. 6 weeks ago, she'd been folding a $100 bill into her apron pocket, hating herself for needing it. Okay, she said, quietly. Okay. Corinne came home 3 weeks later, walking through her own front door under her own power for the first time in longer than either of them wanted to count. The transplant had gone through faster than anyone expected. A donor match found the surgery, successful recovery, slow but steady, the kind of steady that doctors use the word promising for when they don't want to promise too much. She settled into the armchair by the window that first evening, watching Junie fuss with a blanket she didn't need. You look tired, Corinne said. I'm fine. You're always fine. Corinne caught her daughter's hand before Junie could pull away, held it the way she used to, when Junie was small and scared of thunderstorms. Sit down. Just for a minute. Let somebody take care of you for once. Junie sat. Let herself feel the specific, quiet miracle of her mother's hand. Warm, now steady, now no longer cold, with borrowed time. I keep thinking about that night. The one with the rain. If I hadn't... You did. Corinne squeezed her hand. That's the only part that matters. You did. And here we are. The months that followed moved the way recovery does slow, then all at once. Renata found her way back to the diner counter one slow Tuesday afternoon in an apron that wasn't Rosie's anymore. She'd left, Marge said not long after the register incident, taken a job across town, where nobody knew the story. She stood too straight, the posture of someone who'd rehearsed an apology and was terrified of forgetting the words, and she said what she'd come to say about the jealousy, about the story. She'd wanted to believe about never once asking herself why kindness should have been hard for someone else and easy for her to resent. Junie listened, thought about how heavy grudges got to carry, and slid a cup of coffee across the counter instead of an argument. On the house, she said, and meant something bigger than coffee by it. By spring, the scholarship had a name. Small at first, just enough to cover tuition and books for 2 students a year. Kids working double shifts, the way Junie once had kids who'd stopped believing anyone was watching for them, but real. They called it the Winters Doyle Fund, and Opal cried at the announcement dinner, which she would later deny, completely blaming it on bad lighting and worse wine. Though Junie had seen it happen, 81 years of quiet, unclaimed generosity, finally getting a name stitched onto it. You didn't have to put my name on it, Opal said afterward, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin she absolutely did not need. You've been paying for strangers' breakfasts for 15 years and never once let anyone say thank you. Junie squeezed her hand. I figured it was time somebody said it loud enough for you to hear it. It was raining the day the new intern started at Whitmore Holdings. A girl no older than 20 soaked through from the walk between the train and the building, standing in the lobby with a folder clutched too tight, and the particular wide-eyed panic of someone convinced she'd already made a mistake just by showing up. Junie watched from across the room. Watched a junior director glance at the girl's damp, mismatched blazer and turn away without a word. Watched the specific small cruelty of being looked past. She remembered that feeling. Remembered it exactly. So she crossed the lobby, held out a hand. Introduced herself like the girl mattered because she did. Because everyone always did, whether the room had decided to notice yet or not. You're soaked, Junie said. Come on. There's a dry blazer in my office and it'll fit you better than anything downstairs. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not trouble. Junie smiled the same smile she used to give strangers over a diner counter, rain streaking the windows, a coffee pot warm in her hand. You're just having a hard morning? Those aren't the same thing. The girl followed her, and somewhere behind them unseen a door held open a little longer than it needed to. Because that was the thing. Nobody had ever fully explained to Junie, not until she'd lived every version of this story herself. The giving and the needing, the accusation and the proof, the door slammed shut, and the one impossibly held open. Kindness was never a single act. It was a current, passed hand to hand, quiet and unglamorous, from a woman with a napkin full of cash to a girl with a coffee pot. From a girl with a coffee pot to a man who'd spent 20 years looking for someone who didn't know she was being watched from a man in a borrowed coat, to a boardroom that finally listened. And now, on a rainy Tuesday morning, from Junie Doyle to a stranger who didn't yet know that being noticed could feel like this. Like being handed something warm, like being told without a single word, needing to say it out loud, you belong here. You always did.